Hello, and welcome to Godless Bitches. This is your host, Beth Presswood, here with Jen Peeples.
Hi, everybody.
And Tracie Harris.
Hello.
Linnea couldn't be with us because she is moving, just like I was a few weeks ago. So hope she's happy in her new place. We have a lot to talk about today. Well, first of all, we are sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a secular group committed to the separation of church and state and the promotion of positive atheism. The ACA also promotes two other podcasts, the Atheist Experience and the Nonprofits. And there will be a Nonprofits this coming Saturday. So that is also back since Presswood Dillahunty International Studios has moved. So, how's everyone's week been?
Oh, pretty busy so far, yeah.
Well, I'm not too happy this week. The war on women is still going strong and doesn't seem like we're winning. Every day. This podcast, it's going to be the same podcast. Probably till Election Day. Is what it feels like to me. Because there's so many bills being proposed, so many quotes, so much hatred and vitriol. It's crazy. So, for the first story, Romney's going to get rid of Planned Parenthood.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah.
And this is after previous statements many years ago when it was politically expedient to do so. He was talking about what a great organization Planned Parenthood was and how happy he was to support it.
Yeah, he was totally pro-choice back in the day. But yeah, he was talking about things he was going to get rid of. Of course you get rid of Obamacare. That's the easy one. But there are others. Planned Parenthood, we're going to get rid of that. The subsidy for Amtrak, I would eliminate that. The National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, both excellent programs, but we can't afford to borrow money to pay for these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I won't comment on, necessarily on the other things, but Planned Parenthood, we're going to get rid of that.
And what exactly did Romney say he was going to replace this with?
Nothing.
Okay. Because, these services that Planned Parenthood provides, they're kind of essential. That there's not really another organization that does this.
They're not essential, Jen. The dirty sluts can just shut their legs.
Yeah, that's right. You can put an aspirin between your legs. I forgot about that.
Yeah. So yes, the defunding of Planned Parenthood is a major, major thing. I went to a rally last night here in Austin by the Capitol building for Planned Parenthood because the state of Texas has decided that it just won't take any federal money for the women's health program if they have to give a dime to Planned Parenthood. Doesn't matter what that dime is for, whether it's for a cervical cancer screening or a breast exam or birth control, because Planned Parenthood does abortion.
Yeah. And of course, I think I made this point last episode, or maybe not. Maybe it was something I just posted on Facebook, but there are like 14 abortion clinics in Texas. And the legislation that's currently in effect that has resulted in the loss of some federal funding for reproductive health services for poor women in Texas, and actually it provides support for some men as well. That legislation has not shut down a single abortion clinic in Texas. And that's because they're privately funded. They don't get any government money. The government money is used to provide these essential health services.
Yeah, so they're not only they're not reducing abortion, not with their money, and they're going to increase it because these women are going to get pregnant if they can't get their birth control. It's just duh.
Yeah.
Well, they actually had two articles that ran right next to each other in the Statesman last week, and I had those pulled up. I don't think we got to them, but it was Rick Perry had written an article, and then they had a piece that was like a rebuttal to it that was in the very same issue on the same page by Mark Strama and a few other legislators. And it was it was interesting to see what Perry was saying versus what was in the rebuttal. Because they were explaining that, people need to understand that in Texas, tax dollars don't go to fund abortion. And that has never been a problem. Like, it's never been a problem for us to get federal funding and have that as part of our policy here in Texas. And so they were saying when Perry asserts that they aren't going to give us the federal money if we don't pay for abortions, that's untrue, because we haven't changed our position on paying for abortion. We never did. And the issue was the statement that was like our Texas Health Service or whatever it was that issued that statement. It said something to the effect of like, no Texas dollars are going to go to even a clinic that is affiliated with another clinic. That it was just completely nuts. And I just remember reading it and thinking, this is crazy. And the part of the crazy is the way that it's being spun when, like you're saying, it has absolutely nothing to do. It has no impact whatsoever. There was no Texas money going to abortion. So what was the problem here?
Yeah.
Well, they just lie and say that birth control is abortion, therefore it's funding abortion, or that giving Planned Parenthood any dime frees up another dime for them to spend on abortion, is what they say. Which is clearly just bullshit. But.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely not correct, because, I mean, again...
Yeah, that funding is allocated on a budget. You know what I mean? If tax dollars are not allowed to go to a specific procedure, you can bet there's a budget in place that means that this money is earmarked and other money is earmarked for other things. And so it wouldn't matter how much or how little tax money they got. If you've got something earmarked for specific things, that's what it goes to. I mean, I don't know.
Well, they just lie.
It's just aggravating. It's legal. It's legal. Deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. There were some anti-choice protesters at the rally yesterday, but not very many. It was really only about a dozen. They had a couple signs, and nobody really got to engage with them. I wish I would have. That I really wanted to, but... So, on the birth control front, Arizona has proposed a bill that employers... would be able to not have birth control covered in the insurance. And if a woman needs birth control for a medical problem, she has to furnish some sort of proof to her employer of that she's not taking it for contraceptive purposes.
Oh my gosh, this is so invasive. That's like, how paternalistic can you get here? Not to mention a complete invasion of her privacy.
Well, I think this law actually may be illegal because employers don't have a right to know medical things about you. But,
right.
But you know what I say? I say that every woman who needs birth control for endometriosis or heavy periods or something, go right into her boss and describe in detail the clots and extreme heavy bleeding and pain she goes through every month, and then ask if that's good enough to get birth control.
Yeah, bring some photos. Make sure he sees it.
Yeah. Which, this is probably one of those things that's not going to pass. It better fucking not pass. But that's also why that talking about the medical uses of the pill isn't enough. It isn't enough to say that some women need the pill for medical reasons, Because then they can just come back and say, well, let us know all about those medical reasons. When it's not any of their fucking business why anybody takes the pill, it should just be covered as basic health care.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. I mean, it's just like, what difference does it make? Why? Okay, here's the reason. Because I'm not interested in getting pregnant right now, and I don't want to take maternity leave and have to negotiate childcare with my work hours. How about that? How about I would like to work on my career right now? And maybe that's good for you as an employer.
Well, and not only that, but I bet there are a lot of employers who would decide, let's just not cover maternity leave and let's cover all the contraception in the world. I bet there's more employers that feel that way than employers who want to ban contraception.
Yeah.
But
I also wonder how many of these employers have, like, you know, free daycare in their offices.
None. Pretty much none.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's an uncommon thing, that's for sure. And you know, it's like, well, if you're gonna do all you can to deny your female workers access to contraception, you might want to start setting aside a couple floors for daycare.
Well, no, they can just stay home, be in the kitchen.
Yeah, exactly. That would kind of defeat the whole point here, which is to drive women out of the workplace or to marginalize women as much as possible. Because, I mean, you know, at the risk of sounding vaguely conspiracy theorist here, I mean, one of the clear agendas for this is to marginalize women politically and economically, and you know that's pretty evident here. I mean, just the birth control restrictions alone is enough to, you know, if women have to contend with the risk of a series of unplanned pregnancies, that's going to seriously limit their ability to participate in the workforce. And I guess that's one way to get the unemployment rate under control is, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, you know, getting the unemployment rate down is part of the agenda here. I'm just saying that the agenda is to basically put women back in their place. I mean,
yeah.
I think they just want to make sex as costly as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you won't do it, except that doesn't work either.
Well, yeah, they've, you know, in all of human history, that has never been a realistic option. So, I mean, just the idea that somebody would consider that a realistic option, it's like that person already is delusional because they are ignoring all of human history.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, not only all of human history, but all of human evolution, including the evolution of our closest primate relatives, you know, chimps and bonobos. I mean, if you look at other primates primarily have sex to reproduce, and they only have sex when the female is in estrus. Chimps and bonobos and humans are different. All three of us, three species, have sex many times at all different times during the female's cycle. And in all three of those species, there will be probably thousands of acts, of sex acts, for every birth that takes place. So for humans, we have evolved to use sex primarily as a means of establishing and reinforcing social relationships, social bonds. And so to suddenly say that because somebody has these weird religious ideas, that we're just going to stop doing that, that is simply absurd. That is not going to happen. We are hardwired to do this.
It's repressive. Yes, it's repressive.
It is.
And repressive. Repressive. When a person represses, that's always bad because what you're repressing is going to come out somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's going to come out in usually an ungood way.
Yeah.
like an unhealthy way and something that's not good.
Yeah.
Well, whatever you want to call it, it's like when you sit there and pretend that, you know, this is not happening. This is not going on. I am not going to do this and I'm not going to do this. And it's like, you're going to become neurotic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, look at the sex scandals among some of the Christian conservatives. I mean,
Sure.
Ted Haggard. Does he even believe that he's straight? I mean,
He's completely heterosexual, Jen.
I know, he's completely heterosexual. And he was totally heterosexual when he was, you know, snorting meth off the back of that male hooker that he was having sex with.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of those things. It's like, okay, if you could just acknowledge that, and maybe he's bisexual, maybe that's how he needs to live his life, or whatever. Fine. What's wrong with that? Why does he have to pathologize this?
Yeah, because he's not allowed to be gay.
Right, and because he's not allowed, it takes on this back alley character that and he's engaging in activities that are probably in the long run safe.
Just to get sometimes using an example that is completely unrelated to something kind of takes the edge off the more volatile issue. And it reminds me so much of a friend of mine who hosted a exchange student from France. And the girl came to her house and she noticed right away that there was something wrong with this girl as far as her eating habits. Mm-hmm. And she was just like, this isn't right. The girl never eats. Like, we have a meal, we'll sit down and she just barely eats anything. It's like she can't live off like that. Like, there's no way she could be eating sufficient to survive. Mm-hmm. So she knew something was wrong, and she contacted the service that hooked up the student and said, I think there's something wrong because this girl seems to never be eating. Is she okay? Is there something I need to know? They contacted the family, and the family came back and said, don't worry about it. Oh, she used to have this eating disorder, but she's all better now.
Oh, right? Yeah.
She's all better now. And my friend was like, I'm not sure she's all better now. I'm really not convinced the girl is all better now because something's not right. And she noticed that the girl was extremely polite and helpful. She was constantly volunteering for chores, and she was especially volunteering to clear the table. And when she cleared the table, my friend at one point did something, and she went into the kitchen after the girl, and the girl didn't realize she had been followed in the kitchen. And she was shoveling the remains off everyone else's plate into her face. Taking the used, partially eaten meals and whatever was leftovers on other people's plates and just shoveling it into her mouth as much as she could, just gorging and binging in the kitchen after the meal. Now, my friend, she said when she realized I was standing there, she freaked out and she got really, apologetic, and you could just see the guilt and the humiliation and she goes, and I was just like, don't feel bad. Eat as much as you want. She was trying to tell her it's fine to eat whatever you like. I mean, there's no restrictions in our house on what you eat, how much you eat. There's plenty of food. Well, it doesn't matter because my friend is looking at it like, I'm not judging you about eating too much. Eat as much as you want. But it's the girl herself is in a repressive mode where she is convinced that it's wrong for her to be eating this. And so she's hiding the behavior, and she's doing it in secret, and she's ashamed of eating.
Yeah.
Okay? She's ashamed of eating. And it's like, okay, and I say that aggravated, not laughing, because to me it's such a painful thing to think that a person could be ashamed of something as necessary and normal as eating. But what happens is you can't not eat. And if you pretend that you're not eating and that you have this control and you're not going to eat a lot, you are going to go and gorge yourself an hour later in the kitchen off leftovers. That's what you're going to do. And this is the same thing with the sexuality. Pretending that we're not sexual creatures, that sex is like a sinful thing that happened after the fall, and that it's not a normal human behavior, results in people hiding it, being ashamed of it. They're all trying to dodge their normal, healthy sexuality. And when that happens, you end up being ashamed and practicing in these weird ways that are sort of a subversive mode of what should be a normal thing done out in the open, as far as like, without shame. Not necessarily that you need to be screaming in front of everyone else. But the point is, when you repress it and pretend that you've got control over something that is simply a normal, natural drive that really you don't control. I mean, you can, to a limited extent, I think, control how you act on it. You can't control the drive.
Right.
And when you pretend that you don't have that drive, if you are, for example, gay and fundamentalist and telling people and yourself, I'm not attracted to other men, that you're messing your head up like really badly. And when you're straight and you're hiding and running around and having sex and feeling guilty and horrible, and you live in fear of it, and you're ashamed after you do it, or you're masturbating and you feel all horrible and guilty and feel awful and dirty, this is all messed up stuff messing with your head. And it's a fake paradigm that's been drilled into you that makes you think that something that is normal and healthy and something that you should be okay with is something bad, because you can control people if you can convince them they have a problem and you have the solution, and there's no better problem to convince somebody they have than something that is inherent to them as a human being. Because, wow, that's a problem everyone's going to have. Right? Everyone eats. If it's a problem to eat, well, I can help you out, and I'll help you with your eating problem, meaning that you eat. I don't know, it's just messed up.
Yeah. And that actually is a very good way to illustrate this, because people who have eating disorders have an unhealthy relationship with food for whatever reason. And people who, buy into these repressive, sexual mores have an unhealthy relationship with sex.
Mm-hmm.
And these are all normal human drives. We wouldn't be human if we didn't do these things.
Yeah. So I guess moving on, we did talk a little bit about daycare in that birth control story, so I guess I'm just going to segue to this. This is from Friendly Atheist. Faith-based daycares on the rise in Indiana. So apparently in Indiana, non-religious daycares have to get licenses, which involves, following some rules and regulations for the safety of the kids. You would think that, would be normal and just fine. Well, religious daycares do not have to be licensed. They just have to be registered.
Oh, yeah.
And being registered, you have a lot fewer regulations than the licensed ones. And the number of faith-based daycares is skyrocketing. There are 730 unlicensed faith-based daycares compared with 601 licensed. And, some of the licensed are religious. And there have been some problems. There have been some kids hurt. I think even a child drowned somewhere. So, yeah. And the thing is, I don't even get this. I mean, I guess they wanted to make it easier for religions to open daycares, which I don't even see why you should do that. But, Jesus isn't going to protect the babies.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And, I mean, excuse me. We kind of went through this when we were looking for a daycare, when my son was first born. Actually, even before he was born, we were interviewing daycares for him. And we initially weren't opposed to putting him in like a church-based daycare because we thought, well, he's a baby. He's not going to know any different, as long as he gets good care. As soon as we realized that they didn't have to meet the same standards as regular state-licensed facilities, we struck them off the list because that's just too big a risk to take. The thing is, they're usually a little bit cheaper than the state licensed facilities. And so parents who don't have a lot of money might gravitate toward these religiously affiliated daycare centers that are just registered and not licensed. And it's really another example of religious organizations preying on the poor, and then turning around and saying, oh, but we offer this low-cost daycare and we're doing such a great service to the community, when in fact they are victimizing members of the community.
Which is always how it seems to work. It's like if you don't have money, it just seems like you just seem to get all the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
In general, you're going to get the worst education. You're going to get the hardest neighborhood to live in, the highest crime rate. This is what you get. It's like being poor is not sufficient enough to make your life hard. We've got to saddle you with everything socially ill that we could possibly throw your way, including substandard daycare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, churches are more likely to use physical punishment on young children, which is not only ineffective, it's actually harmful to them. And, children can be injured or killed, even if they're, aside from the trauma of being hit, they can be injured or killed in situations like that.
So, yeah, I actually think this was one of the several issues that when atheists met with the White House that they brought up is, lack of regulation of faith-based daycare, special laws for faith-healing parents, and a couple other things. But, yeah, this is a loophole that even a lot of Christians, I think, want to see closed.
Yeah, well, especially if you know somebody whose child has been harmed or has been killed in a situation like this, where these situations are, they're very minimally regulated, and for people that claim they care so much about children, they claim to be pro-life and they're so concerned about kids, they show a remarkable lack of concern for live, breathing children who are standing in front of them and who need help and need protection from some people who really are vile. I've read too many horror stories about some of these faith-based organizations that care for children and the things that they do to some of these kids, and it's really vile.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I have one more story, and then we can talk about whatever. This is from Sydney Morning Herald. A girl in Morocco committed suicide after being forced to marry her rapist. According to the local press, Amina Filali died after taking rat poison on Saturday. She had been married for the past 5 months to a man who raped her a year earlier. The Moroccan Penal Code allows for a rapist to marry his victim to escape prosecution and preserve her family's honor, according to traditional practice. The victim's father said in an interview with online Moroccan newspaper Good.ma that the court pushed the marriage on her. Activist Abadila Maylanine, I think I might be butchering that, tweeted that Amina had been triply violated, first by her rapist, then by tradition, and then by the Moroccan Penal Code.
Yeah, that's pretty sick.
Yeah. And you know exactly where they got this.
Oh, yeah.
From religion. From religion.
Yep.
So it's the only excuse. It's the only thing that could make making a victim marry her rapist. That's the only way that could ever make any sense. And
well, yeah, because I mean, first of all, you've got to convince people that having sex is a bad thing, and then that if you have sex against your will, it's still your fault, and then if the guy who violated you wants to get out of punishment, that it's okay for him to just marry you, and that's sufficient punishment for him, and your needs or, your right to pursue justice is irrelevant. And that's vile. I feel ill thinking about that.
I'm amazed
I
she
think
lasted the
actually
5
for
months.
myself, I think where this comes from is just societies where, you've got a culture of women as property.
Yeah.
And once he rapes her, she is damaged goods.
Yeah.
And the idea being, who's gonna want her now? Now, I don't know where her culture is, if it's like a culture of dowry or how it works. But if you want to unload that girl, and she's been had, you're gonna have a problem. So the kindest thing this rapist can do now is take that thing he broke. It's almost like breaking something in the store, and they're like, "You broke it, you bought it." It's exactly the same policy.
Yeah, the Pottery Barn rule.
Yeah, of women.
Yeah. You break it, you buy it.
Exactly. So she's the piece of property that he damaged, and now the family can't get rid of her. And so what are you going to do? Do the right thing and take her off our hands. Because what the hell else are we going to do with her? Who's going to want her now?
Yeah.
It's completely despicable. And that, the whole human beings as objects, as property is wrong.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, this whole concept of women as property reminds me of a picture, and I actually shared it on my Facebook wall, and it was about it was a reference to what's going on in Afghanistan right now, where they are, all up in arms because somebody burned a Quran. But, it's okay in that culture to burn women,
Yeah.
And, we're supposed to be culturally sensitive to their right to burn women, but, they're going to, fucking kill our asses if we burn a Quran.
I can't remember how many people they killed. It was either 30 or 60. It was some crazy number.
Yeah. Yeah, over a book. And,
and it was after, and it was accident. Wasn't this the one where it was accidentally burned?
Yeah, it was not even intentional.
Yeah. The books were accidentally burned, and there was an apology issued for the error. Yeah. And that wasn't good enough. They wanted to have the people who burned the books prosecuted under their laws, which I can only imagine what you get for burning a Quran in an Islamic theocracy. But I'm sure it's not something that anybody here would consider reasonable, or probably any of the, it wasn't even an inflammatory act, like meant to be incendiary.
Right.
They're just that insane.
Yeah. Well, and I will also point out that Afghanistan also nurtures a widespread culture of using young boys, the dancing boys, the bachabazi. They are young boys that are taught to dance, and they're dressed as girls or young women. And then the older men who are watching them dance basically bid on them and then use them for sex. And so this is a widespread practice in Afghanistan. And they're going to get irate because somebody accidentally burned a book.
Yeah. I would think if Allah didn't want the Qurans burned, he would make sure that they weren't flammable.
Yeah. You would think he could do something about that.
Just hearing stuff. What the fuck is wrong over there? I mean, anything that's weaker than them, they can fuck with abandon.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't even know. I don't even know what to say sometimes. And a lot of people will bring up things like this, like victims being forced to marry their rapist and stuff, and say, "Well, look how good you have it over here. At least you're not over there." But it's only a problem of degree. It's only a difference of degree. It's still misogyny under there if you just scratch the surface.
Well, and I was watching the Republican primary in Alabama and Mississippi last night. Watching the returns come in, and they were doing demographics, and Santorum won both of those primaries, and I was looking at the demographics, and of course, it's overwhelmingly white and evangelical among the GOP in those two states. But the really astonishing thing that I saw was the number of women, and I forget the percentage of it, but basically the number of women who were voting for Rick Santorum. I mean, and I'm looking at this thinking, do you have any idea? Have you been paying attention to what this man has been saying? I mean, this is the guy who thinks birth control's not okay.
Yeah, you're property. You are property.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, it's, I agree that there's, a degree issue happening. I'm not going to deny that. But it certainly doesn't make, it's almost like, I don't know. You can't complain about a broken arm because someone else is in a body cast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I guess my point here is that one of the things that they've done in Afghanistan and places like that is that, to a large degree, they've co-opted the victims. It's almost like a Stockholm syndrome where, the women in Afghanistan support this system because what choice do they have? And, they become invested in it. And the same thing is happening in, some of these places here where you have women who go to the polls and vote against their own interests. And I would argue that, yeah, it's a matter of degrees between the U.S. and Afghanistan, and it's also a matter of degrees here in this country, depending on whether you live in,
right,
a place that's a little more enlightened or someplace that's not.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking actually, recently having choice discussions and just thinking how there's certain like different range of views on how people see that issue. And, I have my own views on it, and I was thinking, I guess, about the more extreme conservative views and wondering to myself, what would life be like if you really could not escape that kind of tyranny? Like, what if you really were in a situation where these are the people that are in control across the board, making the policy, and this is how they view you? You are a subhuman piece of property.
Yeah.
And this is where you have to live. It's quite a frightening thought. I can't imagine, and it's like that with any form of injustice. When I see movies like Mississippi Burning, I have that same sort of, pit of the stomach, stressful feeling of what happens when you're in this small community and every level of justice that you can seek is corrupt and racist. And you have people that want to kill you. And one of them is the deputy.
Yeah.
To me, that is an unfathomable state. I've never been in that situation. And just the concept of it, I guess, is so frightening to me. That denial of justice and that denial of rights and that sort of, oppressive restriction and totalitarian control, and having nowhere to appeal, no possible appeal. You simply must accept this. I don't know how people tolerate it. I don't know how they don't go crazy, and I don't know how more of them aren't committing suicide.
Yeah. Well, and clearly this woman, who was forced to marry her rapist, saw suicide as her only option, and that's just sad.
It's horrible. Yeah, I mean, it's horrible.
It is.
Yeah.
It reminds me too of the stories where they have, every now and then you hear some crazy group wants to stone somebody to death for adultery, and they're going to bury somebody up to their neck in dirt and then hit them with rocks in the head till they kill them because 2 years ago they conceived a child after they weren't married, or some craziness. And I just think to myself, I don't know what that is, to be the person that's caught in that mess. And your society wants to do this to you.
Yeah.
And you have no appeal. There is no help for you. There's nowhere to go because this is the authorities who are sentencing you to this. They're not even going to help you. They're the ones doing it.
Yeah.
That's a nightmare.
Yeah. And, I think back to, when I was deployed in the Middle East during the first Gulf War. And, we were in Saudi Arabia and parts of the country where American troops had never been before. And, their only previous interaction with Western women were, Saudi Aramco employees or their spouses. And they usually wore, an abaya or at least a veil on their head when they came out in these areas. And so to see a bunch of women walking around, wearing a uniform and, being what they would term immodest, was really shocking. Yeah, how dare I walk around, with my sleeves rolled up.
Yeah. Elbow sex. It reminds me of...
Oh, yeah.
What is that movie? Rocky Horror.
Oh, yeah. But, at the time I was pretty naive about this culture, and it was only after I came back and I started actually reading more about, why are they so weird about this, that it became clear just how shocking that was for them. They are literally not, they had literally never seen any woman act the way we did. And it was just, beyond what they could comprehend. And I was sitting there thinking, oh man, if I'd known then what I know now, I'd have gone downtown wearing my PT shorts, It'd been really outrageous. But, even at that, I mean, there were times when we were approached by, they have these, like religious police that will come up and they have these sticks. And if they find a Muslim who's being a bad Muslim in the street, they beat the crap out of them with these things. And, we were approached a few times by these guys and, they were brandishing their sticks. And so we brandished our M16s and they decided to go brandish their weapon somewhere else.
Yeah, don't bring a stick to a gunfight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had one of the atheists who visited Austin came to happy hour, and she had, I guess, spent some time teaching English in Saudi, I guess. Yeah. And she said she was talking about the moral police, the morality police, whatever they're called,
yeah.
And we were asking her about it, and especially my husband, I think, was interested in, like, what do they do? Like, are they just walking around? Like, what's the deal? And he said something to her about, and she was just like, oh, I didn't care. She's like, yeah, I got like, talked to a few times, because they would just come up and be like very stern with me. And, and she, of course, spoke, I guess, Arabic or... Yeah, and she Arabic, said that when they would speak to her, it was the message was usually like, sister, cover your head, or, and she's just like, yeah, you kind of cover your head a little bit, and then when they leave, you just go back to normal. Like, you didn't really care. I mean, I guess, different countries are, more stern or less stern about it, but apparently she, got her little lectures from the Saudi morality police while she was working there.
Yeah.
Well, I hear they're not as hard if you're clearly, like, Western.
Sure,
yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, there's actually no requirement for non-Muslim women to, wear an abaya. So, the Air Force's rule about, military women off post in Riyadh for a long time was just It was ridiculous. Military women were not obligated to cover up like that. And when I was over there, we never did.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You shouldn't have to. I mean,
well, and besides the fact that, and I'm like, excuse me, the only reason I'm in this rat hole of a country of yours is because you can't field a standing army large enough to defend a landmass this size. So, excuse me, but I'm not going to cover up.
Yeah. Yeah, you're there helping them.
Yeah.
Maybe they need financial assistance.
Yeah.
So, that's pretty much what I've got on the war on women this week, or really, I think all the stories for the past couple days. It's just very depressing. But I think both of y'all had a couple things you want to talk about.
Yeah, I had an update on the Coney 2012 thing. I mentioned that briefly last week.
Uh-huh.
And I said, be careful, do some research, and, find out, if you're going to support this, find out what you're actually supporting, because this looks good when you first see the video. Although I have to admit, the video kind of made me uncomfortable. And part of what made me uncomfortable was that this guy was so willing to use his very young child as kind of the emotional hook to draw people in. But all aside from that, it's like, okay, I just want to know, where their money comes from, for one thing, and where it goes. And their finances are quite opaque. You go to Charity Navigator, and that's one of the reasons they got dinged on Charity Navigator, is because their finances are not very transparent. But they're a nonprofit, and they got to follow 990, so you can actually look that stuff up and see, what they're doing with their money. And so what they do with their money is basically they make films. They do a little bit of work in Africa in the camps and stuff, and then they donate money, to the Ugandan military, to fund some of their operations. That's problematic in and of itself, but that's not really what I wanted to talk about tonight. One of the most interesting things about them is where they get their money. Okay? So in looking at, for example, in 2008, where they got their money, one of their major funders was the Castor Family Foundation. And the interesting thing about the Castor Family Foundation is that they were also major funders of Proposition 8, the anti-gay marriage amendment in California.
Now wait a minute. Let me just ask. This is a group that also funds them, or what? How are they connected?
Okay. The group that produced the film Coney 2012. Mm-hmm. It's a group called Invisible Children. Okay, they're a nonprofit organization. They work in Uganda, and supposedly they're trying to help catch Joseph Kony and bring him to justice. He was indicted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity and stuff like that because he abducts children, or he was abducting children.
Yeah, you talked about it last week a little bit.
So anyway, I was trying to get some more information about this organization because I didn't want to promote them or support them in any way until I found out more about them. And so when I started digging around, started finding out some more information. And like I said, they're getting money from the Castor Family Foundation, which is known for giving money to anti-gay causes. And some of the other major donors to Invisible Children, one of the major donors was this National Christian Foundation. Now, the National Christian Foundation funds nonprofits specifically to advance its agenda, which is to, and I quote, enable followers of Christ to give wisely to advance his kingdom. Okay. In addition to Invisible Children for 2008, and incidentally, Invisible Children got $414,000 from the National Christian Foundation in 2008. NCF also gave the Family Research Council, which is recognized as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. They got over $2 million from the NCF. Focus on the Family got more than $4 million. Discovery Institute got $702,000, among other things. Also, very interesting, one of NCF's major donors is the billionaire Foster Freeze, who you may know as Rick Santorum's sugar daddy. He's also the guy that suggested that the form of birth control that they used when he was growing up was to put an aspirin between your knees.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, interesting little money trail, little data point for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not that surprising that a lot of Christian groups do expend a lot of energy in Africa. Obviously, they're ready to expand anywhere there's a market.
Yeah.
And where there's low education and high poverty, well, that would be a market. I'm not sure exactly how the filmmaking aspect of this benefits those missions.
Well, one of the things that happened during Uganda has a history, especially in northern Uganda. When Museveni, the guy that is in charge of Uganda now, when he came to power, one of the things he did was he had this campaign of driving people in the northern parts of Uganda into camps. Okay, and the express purpose of that, according to that, was to basically protect them from the rebels, specifically the Lord's Resistance Army, which Joseph Kony runs. So that was one of the things, and basically get control of that area. All right, so they drove people into camps. The problem is they forced them into these camps, which is actually a violation of the Geneva Convention. You're not allowed to forcibly displace people like that, and if you do have to displace them because of some other crisis, you have to provide basic services for them. Well, the government never did until it became obvious that people were dying in large numbers in these government camps. And so that's when the aid organizations stepped in. So all these NGOs, most of them affiliated with some kind of religious organization, stepped into Uganda and started funding or providing aid to these camps. The problem with that is that when they agreed to provide aid to the camps, they didn't go back to the government and say, hey, if we're going to do this, you can't continue to forcibly displace all these people because that's a war crime. They didn't do that. They knew he was forcibly displacing it, and basically what they did was enable that. And in doing so, they've actually made themselves complicit in these crimes against humanity. They're actually not considered even war crimes anymore. They're crimes against humanity. So the very thing that Joseph Kony and the LRA are indicted for, which is the crimes against humanity, the Ugandan government has also been indicted for the very same things by the International Criminal Court. Mm-hmm. So there aren't any, real good actors here, and
right,
certainly,
no good guys.
Certainly the religious organizations are not good actors there as well. Now, as to what's happening with how Invisible Children spends the third of its money that it spends helping the children up there, I don't know what I don't know exactly what's happening there. I know that they talk about they're building schools and things like that. I don't know enough to comment on how that's going. What I can say is that these organizations have spent an awful lot of time and money. Incidentally, one of the major donors or one of the major grants from this NCF also went to Lou Engle of The Call. He was one of those guys that was over there talking with the Ugandan government about the Kill the Gays bill. So these guys are heavily involved with a group of people that have been trying to enact this anti-gay legislation in Uganda. Whether IC is involved in that, I don't know. IC being Invisible Children, and I'm not claiming that they are involved in this anti-gay legislation in Uganda, but they are certainly giving money and support to an organization that has itself committed war crimes, and they use about a third of their budget just to make films.
Yeah. I went to a Christian conference in 2007 when I was still closeted called Passion. It was in Atlanta, and Invisible Children was a big player in that. And they had a film about human trafficking, about sex trafficking. And that was, like one of the workshops you could go to was to watch this film. And, it was pretty good, and it brought attention to it, but I don't know how much good they did to stop sex trafficking. So, yeah. And they were definitely affiliated with, very hardline Southern Baptist conservative people who, again, affiliated with, incestuous with, Ugandan kill the gays stuff. So, yeah, they have been entrenched with very, very conservative elements for a while.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize that you had attended a workshop where Invisible Children had presented something. And
yeah, I read a few things about this, and I'm not heavily into it at all. So I definitely make no claims to know anything about it. I've just been reading different people's opinions on it. And I did see one person defending it, saying that their mission is about information and not about action, kind of claiming that the group makes it clear that they are like an informational group that does do videos. Like that's their thing, is just kind of making public announcements about these things to try to draw attention to them, and that they're not really claiming to be an organization that's very actively involved beyond bringing attention to issues. So I don't know if that's true or not. If it is, then certainly that's a legitimate thing for somebody to say, I just speak out about these issues. I don't really, have people on the ground. I don't think that's like an unfair position to take on an issue, to be a voice and not necessarily a player. But at the same time, I also know that, religious charities are huge, and they are heavily involved in third world areas. They have a vested interest in selling product there. And at the same time, they do, I guess, work with some of them, depending on the mission and the group. Some of them are actually doing work there and setting up, granted religious schools, things like that. But I don't know that there's a lot of secular competition to combat. I think it's sometimes the religious charities are just so huge that there is no secular competition to really replace that role at this point.
But at the same time, if they are in fact enabling the displacement of millions of people in a region,
oh yeah,
in that case they're complicit in the crime, and then they can't then turn around and say, oh, but look at all the aid we're providing. It's like the only reason the aid was necessary is because you displaced all these people.
Yeah.
Right, and I think with the churches, they have plenty to answer for. Don't get me wrong. I mean, in addition to, for example, Catholics are heavily involved there, and they're heavily involved in spreading AIDS there. Wittingly or not, that's what they're doing. And yes, they may have some actual claims to some sort of legitimate charity work there or helpful things there. I have no idea, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone could point to something they actually did that was useful with all the money that they're expending there. But at the same time, they do a lot of really harmful stuff. Like you're saying, they bring an agenda down there to people who are highly superstitious in some areas and teach them that witches exist and that you should kill them. And then you end up with people killing their children because they're witches. And people are like, how in the world did that happen? Well, okay, because that's what happens when you teach weird superstitious stuff to people who are superstitious and not educated. And other things like that. When you start telling them that God doesn't want you to wear a condom, and you just end up making a mess of things. But I wouldn't be surprised if somebody who was doing something there that needed money, that was involved in highlighting some kind of an issue regarding Africa, would be funneling a lot of religious charity money. That would, to me, make sense.
Yeah, well, I guess the thing is that for this National Christian Foundation, they don't fund organizations that don't align with their goals. So the fact that they got, over $400,000, the fact that Invisible Children got over $400,000 from them tells me that there's considerable alignment between Invisible Children and this National Christian Foundation.
It is interesting. It's like you say, you'd like to get more information.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the connect? Sometimes you do see a connection and you're just like, I'm not seeing the obvious thing there. Like, what is it that what part of this am I not seeing? Because, why would this group be so vested in this other group, and it doesn't seem to serve their agenda?
Yeah.
But then maybe they're just giving money for some sort of publicity stuff for Africa. I mean, like we said, we're talking about allocating funds, and I don't know what their annual budget is, or so I don't know. I just don't have a clue. I mean, it's like you're saying, it kind of sounds like a situation where there's nothing but bad guys. I mean, not necessarily the groups involved, but in the story about these children and about what's going on in Uganda, it just seems like it's just ugly all the way around.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing about this Coney 2012 video is that I always get suspicious when, white Americans drop into Africa and start talking about how they're going to solve problems in Africa. And it has this, paternalistic feel to it. And it's like, why don't we talk to Africans and find out what they need to solve their problems? Or, empower them to solve their problems, because I think they know better than we do what they need.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think some real education is probably in order.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like you say, it's like you can go to certain countries and you can hand them democracy on a plate and they will vote in a dictator.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes people don't know what they need. I don't know, what categories different nations fall under. Sometimes people will go against their own self-interest and they don't even understand that's what they're doing. But at the same time, it almost reminds me of like the British imperialism and all the horror stories you hear when you're younger about, how horrible that was, and the killing and the slaughter and the massacres. And then, as you get older, you hear, but they stopped the practice of sati. And they were really down on things like the caste system, and it's like, you start learning that there is like a two sides to a story. And so while I would tend to agree that people that are being governed do need to have some say in the governance and definitely have to but I also think to a certain extent they need to be educated beyond some of the beliefs that can be cause some self-inflicted damage. You can't just let a group of people govern themselves when they're still in a state where, as you were saying, they think burning people in the street is a good solution. There's got to be some education there. It's like, let me get you kind of up to the modern century, and then you can look at your country and tell me what you think is best. But let's get past burning people in the streets first and see if we can figure out a good solution for you all and what you need.
Yeah. I would also like to pimp Foundation Beyond Belief. It's a group of atheists and other non-believers, and they promote charity and charitable giving, and they check out all of the recipients of the charity, and you can decide which recipients you want how much of your donation to go to, and it's just a really good thing. So Foundation beyond belief.
Good pointer.
Yeah.
All right. So, Tracie, did you have an issue you want to talk about?
Yeah, it wasn't nearly as dramatic and I guess, life altering and implicating as the other things that have been addressed here tonight. It was just something I had posted, I'd come across. I guess there's like a few female legislators who, in response to some of these more invasive anti-choice bills that have been going forward that are requiring all kinds of counseling and go and get this, and you have to have that, and the doctor needs to shove the thing in front of you and remind you you're a baby killer and, and whatnot. Once you've been, rightfully humiliated for your decision to abort your pregnancy, then you can still go do it if you're, not ashamed enough to be such a horrible person. And, clearly this legislation is wrong. This shouldn't be passed. Nobody should be supporting this. It's completely crazy. But the response from some of these other legislators was to introduce bogus legislation in order to try to make a point about how bogus the original legislation is. And what they were doing was saying, well, let's take an issue that has to do with like men's sexuality. And they picked Viagra access and then went into, I guess, saying, what if we did all these invasive things to you and your rights and made you get counseling and made you get, all this stuff. And then you would have to jump through hoops to get your Viagra and have all this weird invasive crap into your own privacy. How would that feel? And I think part of what I will say that, and I'm going to keep reminding everybody that I agree the original legislation is horrendous, but I didn't like this particular response. And part of the reason I didn't like the response is that when I see government representatives putting forward policy or legislation or anything else that is a waste of taxpayer resource and dollars, I don't particularly like the fact that they're using their position to make a point rather than do a job. And it's reminiscent to me of like a school, a public school, where the administration says they're going to have prayer in school, and they know it's going to be challenged, and they know it's going to go to court, and they know it's going to be overturned, and yet they still do it because they just want to be the umpteenth school who dragged this issue through the courts. And maybe one day the courts will lean favorably, and then we can bring this up, to a higher chain or whatever their goal is. So I'm never happy about that kind of process of introducing something just to make a point that is not going to make it through the process, and you're just doing it to make an issue of it. I think that the bills definitely need to be made an issue of, and I wouldn't have a problem with a legislator doing exactly what our legislators here in Texas did with Rick Perry, getting together and saying, we would like to write an article and submit it to the newspaper, which will give it, a full page for you. They'll devote an entire section in the editorial area to any legislator that's willing to write an article. I can't imagine that if you're at the level of Washington, you would not be able to get space in the New York Times and the Washington Post in any number of very large papers if you wanted to make the point that, I'm a legislator, and if I tried to pass a law regarding Viagra and be, this invasive and give your mock legislation and explain why it would be a problem, you could do that. You could do that on your own time, on your own dime, without tying up the legislative process and what's supposed to be work that's going on to make good legislation, not to counter poor legislation that should never have gone through with bogus legislation that's not going to go through in order to make a further point and tie this up even more. The other problem I think I had with it was that the counterbalance that was used was men. And so it went from, what if this was done to men? And since I started working with you, Beth, on this podcast, one of the things that I've seen is a major concern seems to be this definition of feminism as whether it's egalitarianism or whether it's gender equity or whether it's women's rights. And there's a whole lot of arguing about that, about the label and the, for example, the female root of the word. And people are clearly confused and clearly operating under misconceptions if in fact, gender equality is the goal. A lot of people see this as women's rights, and a lot of people have branded women who wear a feminist label as being anti-male. And so using a male example as the counter example, for me, was kind of problematic because it drew a line down here that went, instead of just saying this targets women, it then drew a line and said the counterbalance to this is men. So now it's women on one side, men on the other. And then we had another issue. I had another issue of her specifically when she called out the legislators who were responsible for the original bad legislation. She inserted that they were male. And for me, this is kind of an irrelevancy because as we were discussing earlier, Jen had brought up that there's a ton of female Rick Santorum supporters who are completely and dedicatedly anti-choice. They would love nothing more than to outlaw abortion outright, and yet they are women. This is not something that I see as particular legislators who are male doing. This is something that I view as social conservatives promoting, men and women, social conservatives. These people on the Hill, whether they're male legislators or not, are representing large groups of people who consist of women and men. That, if polls are any indication, represents about half the nation. Not necessarily half the nation that would outlaw abortion, but half the nation that appears to be saying, we would like to be a conservative faction and push conservative agendas in this country. And the idea of calling those legislators out as men, the men who were the male legislators on the Hill who were doing this, bringing their gender into it, reminded me of some of the things I had said about how I dislike the idea of people making a big issue about my gender when it's not relevant to a particular issue. And I felt like women's gender is relevant to this issue because women are specifically targeted by the original bad legislation. However, the gender of the people promoting this is not an issue because there are men and women promoting anti-choice agendas. And if our goal is to pull men and women who agree that we need to work together for gender equity into a sane center and marginalize the edges that are screaming, I don't like men, I don't like women, then injecting gender where it isn't necessary seems to me counter to that end.
Yeah, I guess I didn't have any problem with the example that was used in this, as far as the unnecessary examination for a Viagra prescription.
Sure, it was a fair analogy. I mean, she could have used any demographic. Any demographic would have done that. Yeah. But
yeah, when I actually read through that a little bit more, when she was basically implying that it was just men that were supporting, the forced ultrasound stuff, that's when I thought, okay, I think it's probably, certainly mostly male legislators who are doing this.
Right, but most legislators are male.
Right, exactly. Which is a whole nother problem that we need to address.
Different issue.
But yeah, I thought, okay, the fact that most male legislators or most legislators are male is probably just incidental to this, because there are actually some conservative female legislators who support this. And so, yeah, when I was looking at that, I thought, yeah, that was probably not the best way to word that.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to fry this legislator, because honestly, I mean, I've talked before about how we get on here and we talk, and this woman's talking in an interview and she's not scripted. And I know there's going to be things that come out of her mouth, and she might even look back at it later and say, I could have worded that better. I'm not like hammering her and saying, oh, what an evil, horrible woman, and she's just, destroyed the cause of feminism with this horror. I mean, this is not my point. Yeah. I'm just simply calling out that we have made a sort of a point on this show to say that when we see a thing that seems to cause a divide more than bringing things together, that we will fairly point to that. And I felt like this needed to be fairly pointed to as an opportunity when we could have used more gender-neutral wording and more gender-neutral examples to make the same points, and not really split it into male and female divide. There was another quote from the interview, and I'm trying to find, where the legislator said, this is about setting and leveling the playing field. Women are not going to take this lying down. We are going to stand up for the rights that our foremothers have fought for. We are going to stand up for ourselves, and we are certainly going to stand up for future generations of women. Again, I agree that this issue targets women, but I think it would have been good to say something more gender neutral, in the sense of people who care about our basic rights and our civil liberties are not going to take this lying down. People who have fought for gender equity, men and women, foremothers and forefathers, are going to stand up for this. I really felt like it framed it in a sense of saying that, women have been struggling to improve this for so long, and it's something that all these women have been fighting for, and these women have been working for. And yes, women have been working for it. But if the goal is to be inclusive, then I think it's fair to point out that there have been men who have fought right alongside. And there's nothing wrong with pointing that this is not a woman's fight. Just because they're attacking women doesn't mean it's a woman's fight. I mean, Jen, you're gay. Gay marriage is all over the news right now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Certainly it is an issue that targets homosexuals. And yet, this is everybody's issue, because this is an issue of a violation of civil rights that everybody needs to get involved in. And everybody who believes in equity needs to see this and say, oh, no, this is not okay. I'm not gay, but you can't do this to a citizen. Yeah. This is a citizen. And that's what I would like to see is when somebody, just because it's targeting gays doesn't mean that this is a gay-only fight. It's not just a gay fight. This is not a battle that gays need to wage. This is a battle that everybody that cares about other people's rights, and even your own rights, needs to be willing to wage.
Yeah.
Needs to be inclusive. It's definitely targeting gays, but it shouldn't be looked at as the gays' problem. And this shouldn't be looked at as a woman's problem, because it targets women. Certainly it is a problem for women, but this should be everybody who gives a crap about gender equity's problem.
That's a fair point.
And to be fair to her, I'm going to say, and also to be fair, and I'll just, I'll give her name, because like I said, I'm not slamming her. This was Nina Turner from Ohio, and this is just some things I think could have gone a little better. One of the things that she did do is that at the end of her interview, she did a pretty big, generous thank you to the men who are supportive of the issue. So she did ultimately make it clear that, she was including men in the fight, and that she did want to thank them, and that she did acknowledge men have been supportive in this. So it wasn't like she was, she wasn't, man-bashing, man-hating. I think it was just maybe a little bit too gender-specific than it needed to be.
Well, like you said, she was, it was not scripted. She probably just spoke off the cuff, and, sounds like, that I don't want to put words in her mouth, but it sounds like, that might be something she'd walk back if given the opportunity, that she didn't mean to make it sound like she was, it was battle of the sexes on this, because it certainly isn't. There's this, like you said, it's not a gender issue. And I would point out that feminism is, in a lot of situations, about women's rights. But women's rights don't come at the expense of men's rights. This is not a zero-sum game. So,
Right.
and I think that's one of the things that, a lot of people that reject the feminism term, aside from, not really grasping the definition of it that hasn't changed in over 100 years, they don't get that this is not women's rights at the expense of men's rights. This is really about gender equity. It's about,
I mean, when I first saw this bill, and yes, I understood this was a spoof, but my first reaction was, my desire as a woman is not to go out and attack men.
Yeah.
That's not my goal to say this is a blow somebody leveled at women, and so let's go level a blow at men, show them how it feels. That was my concern, I think, about the article and how it would come across to people that didn't give it a careful reading. And the other problem I had, that it actually showed, because the interviewer, when they talked about the Viagra legislation, I was concerned, people are going to misunderstand this. And the interviewer actually said, given the fact that most of the members of the legislature in Ohio are men, I'm guessing it doesn't have a lot of chance of passing. And my thought was that this demonstrates the problem. The bogus legislation isn't going to fail because it's bogus. It's going to fail because male legislators are considering it as anti-male. Why would I want to imply that if the legislators in Ohio were predominantly women, that they would actually pass ignorant, sexist, constitution-defying legislation that's aimed at destroying civil rights of an entire demographic within the U.S.?
Well, and this reminds me of the attacks against the judge in the Proposition 8 case out in California. This was a guy who had a distinguished career on the bench, and suddenly, the pro Prop 8 faction suddenly starts attacking him, saying, "Oh no, this guy's gay. He can't hear this case. It's a conflict of interest." It's like a gay man can't render, an appropriate verdict based on the law just because he's gay.
Yeah. But if he's straight, that doesn't make him biased.
It's like, right. And he wouldn't have a bias if he was a straight married guy.
Right.
But, it's the same thing. It's like, male legislators can't, they can't look at a piece of legislation and make a decision that's not based on, their gender.
Right.
And that's absurd. I mean, I think that a lot of these guys have made the wrong decision in supporting, draconian legislation that's clearly an attack on, a woman's right to choose abortion. But I don't think they're making these choices because they're male.
Right. If they were, then I would expect not to see so many men supporting, women's rights, and I would expect to not see so many women supporting Rick Santorum.
Right.
I can't explain that if this is a male-female thing.
Well, and I got to tell you, when I was in college in Alabama and active with Birmingham Now, and we were working on, legislation, influencing legislators, and we actually blocked parental consent laws for a long time in Alabama, and we had a lot of help from male legislators.
Right.
And so, this is clearly not a male-female issue. Yeah,
I agree. And I also just want to reiterate, I just don't think that on the job is the place to do this kind of thing. And Beth pointed out to me that, this happens with a lot of legislation, and I agree with her. I think it does. But I think it's a shame. I think it's an abuse of the work that needs to be done on the Hill. I think there's already enough crap legislation that shouldn't be going through. That clogging it up with more crap legislation in order to make points and counterpoints, and it's like, no, someone's got to stop at some point and say, rather than say, I'm going to introduce bogus legislation to show how bogus your legislation is, say, this is bogus legislation, this is not what we're here to be doing, undermining people's rights. Can we please just vote this down and move on to the next thing that's real and helpful?
Well, I would like to make one point on that, in that the system itself is just so corrupt. I agree that, I guess we shouldn't fight bogus legislation with bogus legislation. Ends don't justify the means and all that. But the system and the game of politics is so corrupt. In fact, wasting time is a strategy in politics. If they're wasting time debating this Viagra bill and voting on that, they're not voting on things that could actually hurt people. And that might be part of the strategy that's involved with some of these bills. And a lot of the other bills have been more transparent, with the legislator clearly saying, I don't mean to hurt men. This is just to, hold up a mirror as to what's going on with women. And it's been more transparent that way.
Yeah, I actually had come up with my own gender neutral example of a type of bill that would make a good point. Or I thought it would make a good point. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. You can correct me if you think it's wrong. But I was suggesting a bill where, and this is what I wrote it out myself, maybe I should submit it for someone to introduce it, that citizens who are eligible to donate blood but do not are compelled to report to a doctor's office every 8 weeks by law, to spend 1 hour in consultation with a doctor, and to hear a live testimonial from a patient whose life was saved by a blood donation. Additionally, all citizens who are eligible as live organ and tissue donors who do not donate will be similarly compelled to visit a doctor and hear a testimonial from someone saved by an organ or tissue donation. They will be additionally compelled to visit a counselor to address their potential sociopathic tendencies that could be the cause of their lack of concern and consideration toward the lives of their fellow citizens. Anyone who refuses to comply with these requirements will be compelled to donate. And at the end of that, I kind of put, I'm tired of living in a society where people assume their right to bodily autonomy outweighs another human being's right to life.
I love your bill.
Yeah.
So we should pass it.
Pass it. Right.
I think it's unanimous. There we go.
Hey, I expect to see that in the Texas Ledge next session.
I'll send it to Rick Perry. It might actually go through.
Yeah, there you go.
That definitely does get around the problem of pitting men against women.
And it shows people how this is a violation of your bodily autonomy and using the excuse that it's saving people's lives.
Yeah.
If someone's life weighed against your bodily, autonomy, your right to privacy and your bodily autonomy, if it's a no-brainer that right to life just trumps everything and trumps your bodily, autonomy, then surely your inconvenience at a blood donation every 8 weeks does not constitute, your right when you consider that people could die if you don't do this. So if this is about your inconvenience not outweighing a right to life, then there should be no problem compelling these donations.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if there, is any tactic that needs to be used, if bogus legislation, if they're going to use that, they should use yours.
Thank you.
I'm completely down with
bogus
that.
legislation for a bogus vote.
Well,
anyway, that's all I had.
Yeah, and tell them they have to take my blood again because, I would like to donate again, but they won't take mine.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm serious.
Is it like a medical reason?
No, well, technically, I guess, yes. I lived in too many, I lived for too long in
yes, you were like the Botswana and have you ever been to Tanzania? And it's and where's that at? I don't know if I've ever been there. Is that near Ohio?
Yeah, it's like
they have some weird forms. If you've never done it, if you've never donated blood, believe me, you're going to see some diseases you have no clue. Do you have, and it's 16 letters long with a hyphen and another 20-letter word, and have you ever had this, and did you ever get a Duramata brain transplant covering? It's what? I mean, what is this? And I'm sitting here, ultimately you're filling it out going, I don't even know, but I'm assuming that if I had something like that, I would have been told. So I'm going to say no, I don't have this. There was the first few times I did it, I had to ask, I was like, can you explain what, does this mean that? Would this include, this other thing over here? And it was very strange. And then, once you get kind of used to the form, you're like, okay, but yeah, there's like have you ever spent more than time that adds up to 3 or more years in the last 15 years in, the UK or Africa? You're like, what?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So,
I think not. No.
So, yeah, they won't take my blood now. Yeah,
Wow.
I came back from, a deployment one time, and I went in to donate blood, and they asked me some questions, and they're like, oh, you're permanently disqualified now. And I'm like, what?
Oh, permanent? You're kidding.
Yeah, I can never donate blood.
It's permanent. Man, what sewer hole did you go visit? It's like forever? You're serious?
I'm serious.
Wow.
I am.
I never want to go there. You're going to have to email me the location so I know to never go. Wow.
Yeah,
and spooky.
Before that, I had donated like 2 gallons of blood already, so I was like a regular donor.
You were like, I'm going to get my 5-gallon mug, and I'm all set with getting the T-shirt, hoodie. Oh man. That's a bummer.
See, I used to go in with a bunch of Army officers, and we would have competitions to see who could fill that blood bag the fastest. So we'd be sitting there, doing the bicycling on there, trying to get the blood bag to fill faster. And
did you like take a bunch of aspirin before you went? Like,
no, we didn't do that. But we would. I mean, the people in there in the blood mobile would be running around saying, "Stop! You're gonna pass out!" And it's like, "Hey, as long as I win, it's okay."
You're taking half a bottle of aspirin the week before.
Yeah.
You get in there, it's like, we got a bleeder. We can't stop it. It won't stop. Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, I went for a while. They were changing the weight up, and so I was like alternating between weighing enough and not weighing enough, and I had to do the phoresis platelet. I don't even know what I did because they were like, well, you can do this. And it's like, oh, what is that? Oh, it's like about a bigger needle and it takes 3 hours. It's like,
oh, yeah. Yeah. I was a plasma donor for a while too.
No, I don't think this was plasma. I heard the plasma needle is pretty terrifying. I haven't done that one.
Yeah.
Well, I don't donate because I have no veins and pass out anytime a needle comes near me, so.
Yeah, no veins is rough. There was a guy that could just get any vein. Boy, he was good. I used to always ask for him. And then I just got brave and let them start experimenting on me. He's learning. Oh, yeah, let him go. It's like, whatever. Half a bag in, you quit bleeding. They're twisting the needle, trying to make it work. And then it doesn't, and they're like, sorry, we got to throw it away. We can't get the bag full. It's just, we can't mess with your vein anymore. And you're like, thanks, because it really hurts now.
Yeah, and then your arm's purple for the next week.
And now we're scared, like all these people who at first were like, I should donate so I don't have to go through the mandatory counseling.
Yeah.
And now they're
really,
afraid.
It's not that bad.
If
you're listening and you're scared, it's not that bad.
Yeah, I mean, you may, if Beth is saying, if you're a fainter, don't do that to yourself. If you have no veins, you'll find out the first time, and you don't need to, keep putting yourself through that if it's just too much. I mean, I think that's reasonable. And obviously they have some really sad policies, like if you're a gay guy, they won't take your blood, and that's a little bit of a problem that I think they need to be looking at a little better. There's got to be a way to handle it other than you just don't count. I mean, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. And maybe this is like a serious, issue, whatever. And they've got these health reasons. I don't know. But it just sounds to me a little extreme to say if you're a gay guy, you can't donate at all, ever. Ever, forever.
And I don't know if they've changed this, but their criteria for what constitutes a heterosexual woman was just absurd for a long time. It was like, have you had sex with a man since 1984?
Who's ever had sex with another man? That was one of the questions. Have you had sex have you ever had sex with a man who's had sex with another man? Have you ever taken money or drugs for sex? Have you ever had sex with someone who has taken money or drugs for sex? It's like I could have the thing down. It was funny.
Yeah.
Crazy form. I mean, literally, talk about privacy invasion. They're going to ask you if you've done all sorts of things that you'll be like, I never even thought of doing that. Is that even legal? That's dangerous.
Like, you can do that?
Okay, I think I'm just like clearly trailing off into the crazy tangential land of done.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So everybody go donate blood and donate to Foundation Beyond Belief.
Yeah, call ahead if you want to donate and just ask them, what if they probably have it posted online somewhere what the eligibility is, and
Yeah,
I would
they
check
do.
that out before you waste a trip down there.
Yeah. All right. So it's been a good show. Next week we have on Tanya Smith from Atheist Alliance International.
Cool.
And we'll have some fun with that. And maybe we'll have Linnea back, hopefully.
Yeah. I miss Linnea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about 6 weeks of no shows for her. She must be, raging. All right.
Good.
So, talk to y'all later. This is Beth signing out.
This is Jen signing out.
This is Tracie signing out.
Bye.